Good morning. My name is Grzegorz Ekiert. I'm Professor of Government and the Director of the Center for European Studies, and I would like to welcome all of you to this important event this morning. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Pierre Moscovici to Harvard, to the Center for European Studies. We have very little time, so that introduction is not going to be long. And I think that what I will say is that Pierre Moscovici is the Minister of Finance and Economy and Foreign Trade of the French government. He was Minister of European Affairs from 1997 to 2002. He's been a member of European Parliament, a member of French National Assembly, and was re-elected as recently as 2012. Pierre Moscovici is one of the key policy players in Europe today, and we are very grateful that we will have the opportunity to listen to your address. Pierre Moscovici.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. It's a bit moving to me to be here because this lecture, I was supposed to give it on the 9/11/2001, but I was in a plane over Manhattan between Washington to Boston when the Twin Towers were attacked. And I landed here in Boston, but I never made my lecture in Harvard. I spent a week here with the American people and all the people living here. And I really was impressed by the strength of the reaction of those students, those professors, whatever their religion was. And for me, this remembrance is always present. I know that the relationships between France and the United States, Europe and the United States, sometimes are complicated, but we never must forget that we are the closest allies and friends. And well, this is very special to me to be here today. It is always a pleasure for me to speak with students, with researchers, with academics, with think tanks, as much as my schedule permits. But today it is the case. In a few minutes from now, I will move to Washington, the other way, for the IMF yearly assemblies. And I'm delighted that the schedule of my visit to the US could accommodate today's meeting. Recently, I was reading a report by the National Intelligence Council entitled Global Trends 2030, Alternative Worlds. It looks to the future from an American standpoint and offers various scenarios for what the world will be or is likely to be in 2030. The report is 166 pages long and fascinating, and exactly three paragraphs are dedicated to Europe. I see that as a sort of indifference, or perhaps it would be a more positive view, impatience on the part of one of our most important partners when dealing with a Europe that appears to be stuck in a crisis, a Europe that is not combat ready when it comes to coping with current and future challenges. Today, I would like to counter this vision and share with you my deep and perhaps surprising for you convictions of the importance of Europe. True, the euro area is experiencing one of the worst crises in several decades, probably since World War II. But I am confident that it will emerge from this crisis stronger and that its strengths will be drawn from heightened integration. In the coming years, the euro area will undergo profound transformations. Setting up a single currency 10 years ago entailed, and you must be conscious of that, a radical change for the way European governments conduct their economic policy. And there, I would like to insist on one fact. 10 years ago, we're here in the United States, which is a federal state, which was created as a federal state. Europe is not a federal state. It's what our former president of the Commission, Jacques Delors, called a federation of national states. It's very difficult to take decisions between 28 members or 18 members in the months to come of the Eurozone. But 10 years ago, the creation of the euro is very recent. And of course, when somebody or when some political object is so recent, it's quite logical that you tend to adjust. We must draw now the necessary conclusions from this shift. Our current discomfort stems from the fact that we do not fully know what lies at the end of the tunnel. The euro area is and always has been under construction, an ongoing process, and generally in the right direction. And it is my hope that in the coming years we are going to see a new phase of acceleration in the European project. In any case, this is what I am working towards. Today, I would like to take a brief look back at several milestones in my government's action in the European economic arena since coming to power in May 2012, and I will outline France's priority for Europe. The financial crisis hit the euro area when it was at a critical juncture. The euro had been in place for less than 10 years. The circulation of euro coins began only in 2002, just 3 years after the euro was launched as an electronic currency used by banks, foreign exchange dealers, big firms and stock markets. It was in 1999. And while the creation of a single European currency has been envisaged as far back as 1970, it was only the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the outlook of German reunification that gave the single currency project the critical push it needed to see the light. It was the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. Setting up a single currency was perceived at the time as a mere additional step for the integration of the European process. Political leaders in Europe did not fully realize that the single currency and the monetary union would dramatically impact their conduct of economic policies. I was a member of the French government at this time. I attended the European Council when the foundation of the euro was decided. It was in 1998. Clearly, I must acknowledge that. Prior to the 2000s, EU treaties only provided for enhanced coordination of fiscal policies across euro area members. At the same time, full liberalization of capital movements in Europe was achieved, spurred by the single currency, without, and this is a very important fact, dedicated institutions of a regulatory framework to supervise the shift. And I think this is the main, the essential, the fundamental problem. We didn't create the institutions dedicated for a single currency. We created the currency, but we didn't create the political framework that was necessary for it to become a success. Finally, the coordination of microeconomic policies was much looser than coordination of fiscal consolidation efforts, which gave rise to widely diverging competitiveness performances across the euro area. And this is another paradox. Greece, France, Spain, Germany are not on the same board. They have the single currency, but they don't have the same performances or the same incitations for performance. When the financial crisis hit Europe, the euro area was not completed. That is the point. Euro area members shared a single currency. They had and they have a central bank, the European Central Bank, but fiscal convergence was only partially achieved. the competitiveness gap between members was widening, and financial supervision was organized at a strictly national level. This creates some asymmetries, which of course were major problems. Europe's banks and national governments then got locked in a unique, perverse feedback loop, which saw unemployment skyrocketing and amplified the devastating effects of the crisis. An important source of the fiscal problems affecting many Euro members was the perceived need by the market to back up weakened national banking systems. And this is what the programs which were designed for Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Cyprus were about. In turn, European banks were in distress because they held large quantities of debt from sovereigns facing challenging fiscal outlooks. This is what is called the perverse loop between fiscal banking debt and sovereigns. Europe's response to the unique challenges it faced was creative but largely incomplete. Right after the crisis hit Europe in 2008, the EU focused on designing a European stimulus package to try and absorb the economic and financial shock. It did not make its mark on the history of Europe, mostly because the EU did not have sufficient resources to back it up. In fact, it barely supplemented largely uncoordinated stimulus packages drawn up at a national level. When sovereign debts started facing even more violent attacks, this was not in 2008, but in 2009 and 2010, Europe set up unprecedented tools to assist vulnerable members. A combination of bilateral assistance programs, ad hoc and then permanent solidarity mechanisms helped stabilize the euro area with the help of the European Central Bank and also with the help of the IMF, which is very present in the solution of the European crisis. Eventually, euro area members agreed that only a European banking union, this is a very important tool, would prevent another perverse feedback loop from forming in the future. At the same time, economic governance started to be reformed, fiscal discipline was tightened, and financial solidarity instruments were gradually set up. They are called 2-packs, 6-packs, and a treaty was signed in order to put that into effect. With this in mind, let's have a quick look back at the past year, not the past years, but what happened for, I would say, 1 year and a half now. For me, three facts stand out. The first is that the worst of the crisis in the Eurozone is over. I would even be more affirmative. I would say the existential crisis of the Eurozone is over. What do I mean by that? When I was nominated as a finance minister of France, it was in May 2012. The day after, I took a plane with the President of France, François Hollande, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Laurent Fabius, and we went to the United States because there was a summit of the G8 and a summit of NATO. And the first meeting with that was in the Oval Office with President Obama and his team, especially Tim Geithner at the time. And the climate was, will Euro survive? Will Greece exit? Will Cyprus default? And when we went a few days after in Los Cabos for the G20 meeting, my first G20 meeting at the presidential and heads of states and government level, we spent our time in crisis meetings with President Obama, with Tim Geithner, with the Spanish, Italian Prime Minister, with Chancellor Merkel, with the French President Hollande, with the finance ministers all over the place. And the question was, how can we solve that? Will the euro disappear? The G20 meeting in Los Cabos was only about that. We were the sick men of the world, and everybody felt our pulse to see if our heart was still beating or was defaulting too. 3 weeks ago, I was in St. Petersburg for the second G20 meeting at the presidential level. Not a word about the Eurozone. The main question then was, how will the emerging countries deal with the end of a quantitative easing, or supposed end of quantitative easing, here in the US? What happened in between? What happened is that existential doubts as to the integrity of the euro area have simply vanished. We did our job. And especially the ECB and the Eurogroup did their job. We now have enough breathing room to focus on Europe's number one priority, which is growth. The goal of return to growth is not beyond our grasp. And there are more and more encouraging signs. But if I said there is no more crisis of the Eurozone, clearly there still is a crisis in the Eurozone. And the crisis in the Eurozone is the lack of growth and solidarity. The euro area just came out of recession in the second quarter of 2013, and unemployment is now trending downward, but at a slow pace, and it's still very high. We must direct all our efforts to encouraging this trend and to develop it. The second milestone in the French government's action concerning Europe is turning the tide of international economic debate, which is now progressively focusing on growth. And this happened here, I mean in Washington, in the IMF meeting last April. France and the US have a very similar position on this point. And my discussions, previously with Tim Geithner, now with Jack Lew, have confirmed this. Starting in June 2012, France called into question the relationship between austerity and growth. In France, in French, austerity is not a good word. It means stopping the social model. It means cutting public expenditures so much that you don't have public services at a high or good level. In English, it's somehow different. Let's say, to get back to the international language of the IMF, that we need to have a better equilibrium between fiscal consolidation, still necessary in order to reduce public indebtedness, and growth. Meaning we must focus on growth. The discussion has progressively taken root in international bodies, as the IMF, the G8, the G20, and also in Europe. And this is why France gained a delay in order to come back to a level of deficit under 3% of GDP. We were supposed to do that in 2013. We will do that in 2015, which gives us more room in order to lead a growth-friendly policy. Making growth one of Europe's focal points is an issue that takes on a heightened importance when one looks ahead to the European elections in 2014. We will have a new European Parliament. At this time, it will be by the end of May. And certainly, I'm personally convinced that Europe has to give its citizens reasons for hope. And it must spell out its plans for preparing for the future. Or else, we'll see a gigantic push of the populist and anti-European movement. I'm not especially afraid of that, but I combat that. And I know that the only solution in order to fight populism and anti-European movement is that Europe delivers again as far as growth and employment are concerned. The third milestone in recent months is France's affirmation of its method in the European arena. Our method does not ignore one basic truth, is that the euro area is not a new moment in Europe's history. It's more than that. It's a fundamental change in its DNA. All the future of the European construction will be articulated on building up politically and economically the euro area. And this is why France prefers a systemic approach for the benefit of all its partners. This represents the direct extension of our own interest in a fully interdependent world and Europe. Our method is also based on a single requirement: to play by community rules. France is of the view that we need EU institutions that can fulfill their unique mission, which is defining and defending Europe's common interest. Contrary to an image, we are not anti-Commission. We are not anti-European Parliament. When I deal with the Commission and European Parliament, and I was twice a member of the European Parliament, I deal with partners. They play their role, and the member states must play their own role. Finally, our method draws its strengths from the Europe's roots, which are, in my view, pardon and promise, to quote the inspired words of philosopher Hannah Arendt. Pardon means reintegrating those who have lost their way back into the community. This brings us to another point, which is solidarity within the EU. Promise means never losing sight of the fact that Europe was built by offering its citizens a better future. Europe cannot be a punishment. Europe cannot be a constraint. Europe has to be a hope and a future. Practically speaking, and I will end by that, what shape will our initiatives take in the coming months in Europe in order to build up a new European future? France's action will focus on two major priorities: restoring growth and creating new instruments that are needed to repair the weakness in the economic and monetary union. Stimulating growth by working in as many areas as possible. This is my top European priority. In order to accelerate, we must first take our foot off the brake. This is why we must sensibly relax the constraints on getting our accounts in order. Compared to US and Japan, Europe has weaker growth, higher unemployment, lower deficit, and a trade surplus. All the signs point in the same direction. Fiscal consolidation, though necessary, must take place at a pace that is more adapted today to the current economic circumstances, meaning growth. Lifting our foot off the brake, yes, but also setting the scene for a sustainable return to growth. This means correcting the macroeconomic imbalances at the heart of the euro area and restoring the economy's financing channels to full working order. What do I mean by that? First, correcting macroeconomic imbalances in the euro area means that everyone must play their part. The root of the crisis are not solely fiscal in origin. They took various forms depending on the country: real estate bubble, overeating, declining competitiveness, fragmented labor markets, loss of industrial bases, weakened tax revenues, falling wages, and so on and so forth. Each country has its own set of challenges, all of which must be faced. France has thus led a very vigorous effort to put its financial house in order, to re-establish competitiveness, and to pave the way for future growth. But all the countries must do that for their own problems. And we also need to coordinate more our action. I mean, those countries who have surpluses should dedicate a part of that in order to strengthen the demand and to help those who are in deficit and who have to lead some reform. At the same time, we must ensure that business are in position to jump on the bandwagon once the economy picks up again. That is why, France is looking to restore the economic's financing channels to full working order. Decisive progress have been made on this front in the last few months. the means of intervention of the European Investment Bank have been considerably bolstered to supplement bank lending laws. More importantly, we are now headed to fully fledged banking union. And France is advocating for a global, complete banking union in order to solve the problem created by a fragmented financial system in Europe. What does it mean? It means that we must have at the same time supervision mechanisms, we are building them, resolution mechanisms, and guarantee for the deposits. Lastly, over the next few months and years, we will have to create new mechanisms to deal with the weakness of the economic and monetary union, i.e. Complete the EMU by constructing its economic and political pillar. What do I mean by that? The changes proposed by France are the logical result of the transfers granted by the euro area members states when the single currency was created. If there is only a single monetary policy in place, but at the same time, 17 today, 18 tomorrow, different economies policies, it doesn't work. The gap is tangible. We must therefore come up with the cyclical adjustment tools that will enable us to cope with asymmetric shocks in the euro area. What does this mean? Let me finish by giving you a few proposals. First and foremost, we must draw up a euro area budget. Such a budget would perform a counter-cyclical function and would be a powerful tool for macroeconomic stabilization by offering the first answer of the European kind to slow down. It would be based on revenues that are sensitive to the business cycle through its own resources or through the issuance of Eurobonds. This is a point we're discussing with our German friends, who are not so enthusiastic, I must say, but in the end, we'll have to do that. Expenditures would also be sensitive to the business cycle. In particular, in my view, this budget should finance actions in key areas of social protection. For example, by providing a primary source of funding for unemployment benefits in the euro area. It would thus serve as a means to express solidarity among its members and give substance to a social Europe, because it's something expected by our citizens. At the same time, we must make the EU's political institutions responsible for protecting our common interest. I told you that I'm very respectful of European institutions, more open and easier to understand because, well, if you look at the turnout in the European elections, it's weak, but it's also weak because people don't see exactly what and who they are voting for. To this end, France proposes creating a euro area chamber within the European Parliament. Within the European Parliament, you have the representatives of 28 member states. But out of those 28, 17 now, 18 tomorrow, have the same currency. And they have common problems. So it would be logical, in my view, that those countries or these representatives could work or should be capable of working together on the matters of common interest. I'm also in favor of a euro area finance minister who would act as a permanent sole Eurogroup president and a representative of the executive function, and may also be, that is my personal view, the European Commissioner in charge of the monetary policy. We have meetings in the IMF today, and this morning I received an SMS from my friend, Jérôme Dijsselbloem, who is the chairman of the Eurogroup. He has to stay in Netherlands because of a budgetary problem there, and certainly it's his duty. But if we would have separate functions, meaning the president of the Eurogroup is not at the same time a finance minister, well, his place would be here as the representative of the Eurozone. And we need to have that permanent function. It's absolutely necessary in order to strengthen the representation and the efficiency of the euro area. I've been too long, so I end with my speech, you might tell me I forgot something, not only about euro. What I forgot, but it was deliberate in a way, is that a huge amount of attention has been paid to the euro area in the last few months, and the EU 28 has faded into the background. When I was supposed to come here in your center on the 9/11/2001, it was to speak about the future of enlargement. Europe at this time had only 15 member states, not 28. And to me, my father was born in Romania, and my mother was from Polish origin. I'm struck by the fact that enlargement was so necessary, that the reunification of Europe was so necessary, and we don't speak about it anymore. But we must not forget about greater Europe, still fundamental when dealing with questions about environment, about trade, about defense, about internal market, and essential in providing Europe with gravitas in relation to its closest neighbors and on the international scene. What I meant is that we must at the same time build this greater Europe and acknowledge that the euro area is a natural vehicle for greater solidarity, for an even closer union, and drawing the relevant conclusions. Building the EMU has since the very beginning been fraught with difficulties and prone by risk. The crisis may well have helped us to better understand that EMU is consistent with the ideals that we are striving for in our best interest. Now, more than ever, we must build upon common ground rather than on our respective national interest. And I see no contradiction between national interest and common European ground. The forthcoming European elections are the perfect stage for an in-depth and informed debate on the need to change the status quo. They will provide us with the opportunity to not regurgitate the European the Europe that French and European citizens are already familiar with, but to use our imagination to offer them solutions that will enable us to build the Europe that we all want. And this is what our future is all about, and this is what my speech was all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very important speech. As you noticed, there were three themes which structured the presentation. The theme of the crisis in Europe, then the theme on French policies and positions on many different issues, and finally the theme of European integration. Mr. Moscovici agreed to accept the questions from the audience. I would like to tell you that this event is recorded, so you are aware of it. But before I do that, I would like to ask you a question about the last part of the speech, namely about the different dimensions of European integration. It seems that there is a slight contradiction between your vision of great Europe, united Europe, and your specific policy proposals, which are going to produce two-track Europe. Europe which will be divided institutionally, will have different representations for different groups of European countries. And I wonder whether there is a contradiction in it, or you see that in some different way.
I still believe in the great Europe. It's only this Europe which can be a major actor in the international field. It's only this Europe that can deal with global matters. It's only this Europe which can deal with foreign trade. It's also our internal market, which is a market of 500 million people. And I'm very attached to that. I also know that we've got to always remember lessons of the history that the division of Europe and also the excessive weight of nations led us to war. And we are in a situation when you can see a nationalistic and populist feeling very strong in all our countries. And this is why we must not lose sight of the greater European project. But there is also an economic reality that some countries decided to have a current single policy, a single currency, and that they need to have now a single policy too, and to reinforce their cooperation. This is what some German politicians in the early 90s, such as Wolfgang Schäuble, who is now the finance minister of Germany, and Karl Lammers called for. I mean, a reinforced cooperation of those countries who have a monetary policy in common. And we need to reinforce that clearly. But what we must not forget is that, first of all, the EMU is not a closed area. Every country in Europe who has the capacity to join the euro area is welcome. We are welcoming now Litva. We will probably welcome Lithuania in 2015. I know about Poland. When I see my friend and colleague Rostovsky, he tells me that the future of Poland is in the Eurozone. And so we can imagine that in, I don't know, 5 to 7 years from now, and again, we are talking about something very recent, we could have something like 22, 23 member states in the euro area. And so the gap between the greater Europe and the Eurozone would be, of course, partly reduced. There are some countries who don't want to get in the Eurozone. They voted against, such as Sweden, Denmark, and there is also a very specific country which raises question about its all belonging to the European Union. And well, personally, I'm convinced that the future of Great Britain is in the EU if they want to. They will have to decide that maybe the future elections in 2015 will be about that. But symmetrically, we must not be paralyzed by this question. And we need to move on. What kind of Europe would it be if we were only waiting for the member asking itself, do I stay or do I leave? And this is why we need to reinforce the Eurozone. What I proposed was not to have two sets of institutions. Let me point one example. When I spoke about a chamber in the European Parliament, I didn't mean a new European Parliament. I meant that those countries who have the euro in common should be capable of deliberating on issues of common interest. When I come to Brussels, and I will be in Brussels Monday after 3 days in Washington, I will be in the Eurogroup Monday afternoon. What is the Eurogroup? The meeting of the Minister of Finance of the 17 members, 18 in January, who have the euro in common. We will meet and we will discuss about our common points. And we will move towards a greater integration of the Eurozone. And on Tuesday morning, we will be joined by our friends from the 28 members, and we will have discussions about the banking union, which we must address together. I think something of that kind should happen in the European Parliament tomorrow, because it would not be normal if there is no legislative debate or debate between representatives at the parliamentary level concerning euro, and it would be even a democratic failure, because it would mean that we would be capable of discussing that at the governmental level, but not at the political level. And this is why I think my proposal is of, we call that bon sens in France.
Thank you so much.
It's quite evident.
I saw a lot of hands, so please ask your questions in very concise form. And please introduce yourself, and maybe we'll take several, and then we'll let you to respond to some of them. Gentlemen in the back, yes.
Bonjour, Monsieur Ministre. My name is Xiao. I work for the OECD and now studying at MIT. I have a question about the speed of structural reform in France. And we know the speed is it's a compromise to satisfy what French people want, probably like working less and more holidays. But however, the slow speed has also dampened the confidence of domestic entrepreneurs and also international investors. For instance, my country, China. So I would just want to know whether you want to keep such compromise or take more drastic measures to speed up the structural reform in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, where is the mic? Please.
Alexandra Cosseron, I'm from École Polytechnique and I'm working currently at MIT. And I have a question about the French energy policy because you seems to be such a strong supporter of Europe, and so I'm quite surprised about the policy you are currently applying in France because the liberalization of the electric market was voted like more than 10 years ago, and in France is still not on. Why don't you just get rid of EDF right now? I don't understand.
Gentleman in the first row, yes, please.
Thank you, Minister. Here in the United States, it took them 1 weekend in order to capitalize their banks after the collapse of the Lehman Brothers. In Europe, 4 years after the beginning of the crisis, and still we don't have well-capitalized banks, at least in the periphery. So my question is, how long is going to take for Europe to make the necessary decisions in order to have a credible banking union and not the half-baked banking union that we seems that we're going to get at the end?
Okay, let's accept one more question, gentleman in the back.
Fostering growth measures. You said we're now into a second step, which is fostering more growth. How much consensus is there about that within the European Union? Second question is about the growing divide between the institutions in Europe and the public opinion. We have elections coming up. What are the short-term measures and tools we can implement to increase the awareness of what's going on within the institutions?
Back to you.
I feel very optimistic about France when listening to you. But, sometimes I wonder, when I'm abroad, or when I'm in Washington, or when I'm in the Eurogroup, people see me as the Minister of Economic and Finance of the fifth largest economy in the world. Not the 17th, the fifth economy in the world. When I'm in the Eurogroup or in the ECOFIN, I'm the Minister of Finance of the second economy in Europe, not the 28th, the second. And I think there are a lot of caricatures about my country. Of course, we love holidays. And it was a social conquest of governments since 1936 to have some weeks of holidays, maybe more than in China. You'll come to that. But, it doesn't mean that we are not a producive country. Let me tell you a short story. A few days ago, I think it was Monday, as a finance minister, I traveled through France in order to see how the economy is working and also to advocate for the economic policy of the government. That's my role. I was in Angers. Angers is the 16th town in France, something like 150,000 people, because we just have 65 million people in France. And I went to visit a plant of a car builder, which is called Scania. Scania is a car builder, Swedish one, owned by Volkswagen. I was there, the worldwide chairman came to see me, and we visited the plant. There are 700 people working there. And at the end, the Swedish manager said, we're happy to be there. We are there for 20 years. And why are we happy? Because we've got a high quality of infrastructures in this country, because we've got a high quality of public services, because you are at the heart of Europe, because you are yourself a strong market and a wide market, and because there is a very high productivity here, very high productivity. And you can imagine that they are not philanthropic people. If they are in Angers, it's because they are in a productive situation. And, well, what does it mean to me? Is that, of course, we need to reform. And we need to reform at the right pace, meaning the pace which is necessary in order to fight the problem we have, which is a lack of competitiveness, and at the same time create social consensus. But when I look at the last 17 months, the months when the government is in office, I see that we reformed the labor market, the most important reform that was ever made during the last 40 years, that we are reducing our deficits, and certainly this is necessary, in order to reduce our public debt, which is absolutely necessary. That we do that now by cutting public expenditures rather than by taxation. That if I look at taxation, well, we are encouraging the business because we want more competitiveness. That we are reducing the cost of labor by some specific measures, such as a tax credit of 20 billion euros next year, which represents a reduction of labor's cost of 6% in 2014. That we are also reforming the pension system. Well, people outside or abroad tell us we should go at a higher speed. It's not possible, because you cannot reform a country against its own culture or its own social model, but certainly we are reforming it more than it was ever done before. And people are expecting now results. I understand them, but results are coming. And what are the results? Is that we went out of the recession, that now growth is coming back at a too slow pace, but we need to encourage that again, that the economic indicators are better, and well, that's the way we can change this country. But it is a strong country. I'm always mad after French bashing, wherever it comes from, outside my country or inside my country. People can be of different orientations or different opinions, but they have to stick to reality. Second, about EDF, no, we won't get rid of it. But why should we get rid of it? No, not at all. Not at all. So you're absolutely wrong. You can liberalize a market. It doesn't mean a thing about who owns the country. The question of property is not the same. No, I mean, the question of property is not the same question as the question of liberalization. And certainly we are applying the European laws. We are making some efforts about that. And we also have our own choices, which you know, which are also a strength for this country. I was in Canada a few days ago, and they have their strengths, which is water. We have our strength, which is nuclear energy. We are reducing the part of nuclear energy in the energetical mix, but by developing other sources. I'm in favor of a European policy of energy, but certainly I won't renounce to EDF. Certainly not. The third question was about banks. Well, what you point out is two things. The first one is the difficulty to decide of a union of 28. Certainly, we cannot in a weekend decide things like that, because we have national banking systems and a single currency. And this is what it is about. We need now, having a single currency, to have a single economic policy and a banking union of very high quality. And we are working on it with our own rhythm. To answer your question directly, we have established banking supervision. Now it will be implemented in 2014, hopefully. But I saw the French banks, for example, Monday, and clearly were on that track. We need to define a common resolution mechanism before the end of this year. It will be very tough because the positions of different countries, such as Germany and France, are not exactly the same. But certainly we need to do that. And then the deposit guarantee scheme. But France is advocating for a global and complete banking union. Because what people cannot understand, and this is clearly related to what public opinions are about, is that you have the same currency, but you don't have the same interest rates when you are across a border, or you don't have the same banking sector. And so we need to really strengthen that. And this is why the banking union, in my view, is not a technical problem or a technical reform. It's a political reform of major importance. The last question was about
The first one was about the
equilibrium, the mix. The debate in the international and European institutions is clearly changing. The mood has changed in the recent months. It's clearly due to the pressure of the Obama administration. It's due also to the reflection of the IMF. It's due to the debate in Europe. And I would say that we are still worried about fiscal consolidation, and we need to be, because having a too high public debt is something which is unstandable if you want to build a strong and credible growth. Personally, I consider the euros dedicated to the reimbursement of public debt as improductive Europe, as well for public services or for competitiveness. And we need to reduce the public debt. So we need to go on with the efforts to reduce deficits. But at the same time, we must find as well the right pace and the right tools in order to sustain growth. Just one example. I mentioned the fact that we have now 2 years to reduce our deficit under 3%. We were supposed to do that in 2013. Would have we done that in 2013 would have meant putting our country into a deep recession. We chose to let the automatic stabilizers play their role. And I think that this is the right balance we must define at the international level or at the European level. We still have debates, but I think we are on the right track. And the last question was about the European elections and immediate measures. You know, Europe is not about immediate measures. We can regret that, but we cannot decide in a weekend to recapitalize our banks or in 4 days. Why so? Because the decision-making process is very complex between 28 member states of the greater Europe, or between 18, 17, and tomorrow 18 member states of the Eurogroup. But what must be at stake in the European election must be a debate between projects, and hopefully pro-European projects. I don't see any alternative to the euro now. I understand that people are dissatisfied with the way the euro area functions. I think that they want and they need to have a Eurozone which becomes as well economically and politically integrated. This is an absolute necessity. If it is not the case, then we will have a rebellion against the euro without a solution, which is the worst situation we can be in. So when I make here proposals, it's in order to feed the debate for the European elections, and I hope that this debate can create the conditions for a more integrated Eurozone or euro area.
You mentioned the need for growth, and then you also mentioned the tax policy and stimulus that you're planning to give or are giving. I'm wondering how that squares with France's view at the OECD in their tax base erosion and profit shifting, and your view of Ireland with its low tax. And also, just to echo the first question, wouldn't you be much better off with a 40-hour work week and 3 weeks of vacation than artificial stimulation?
Still Like Gervas, I am visiting at the Center for European Studies. And I want to ask you a question about fiscal policy in Europe. Monsieur le Ministre, I have heard that you wish to implement FATCA in France. For the audience, it is an extraterritorial law of the United States. France will report the accounts of Americans and in France to the IRS, and France will also report the French accounts of French citizens who live in the US. My question is, what is the status of the agreement of the Department of Treasury with France? And as a French minister, do you still wish to sign it? Or has the situation changed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's have two more, please. The lady, the first.
Hello, I'm Joëlle Bitton. I'm a doctoral student at Harvard Graduate School of Design. My question was, what do you think of the proposal of the IMF to tax once and for all 10% on the savings to erase the debt?
Okay, and one more gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name's Hunter Fortney. I'm a junior at Harvard College. I had a question about the relationship between France and the European Union. You mentioned before how you want there to be more consolidation in the European Union, and this will require the EU itself to have more power over the member states. But when the EU made recommendations to France to reach the deficit target in for the 2013 recommendations, it doesn't appear that France had really followed them. They took them more as recommendations, which they were, but the fact that you give more power to the central organization like that, wouldn't that lead one to believe that you follow what they say? And I like, for specifics, I mean, like, you mentioned labor reform. I think the European recommendation also wanted a larger structural reform between the fixed-term contracts and the indefinite contracts. And for tax policy, someone else mentioned that, broadening the base and lowering the marginal rates, as opposed to a more complex subsidy system.
Thank you so much, back to.
I will start with FATCA with a smile, because I was supposed to sign this agreement tomorrow with Jack Lew. It is not possible because of the shutdown. But, but it's not my fault. So it is ready, and it will be signed as soon as the things are better in the US. But certainly we are clearly in favor of those FATCA agreements. We are ready to sign a FATCA agreement with the US, and we are advocating for a European FATCA, because I think that the automatic exchange of information is a much more performing and transparent way than the present banking secrecy and the exchange of information only relying on demand. Because when you have a demand, you can have also an answer which is yes or no. With the automatic exchange of information, things work clearly. And you may not know it, but France pleaded with a lot of strength, especially in the G20, in order to have the automatic exchange of information as an international standard in 2015. And we obtained the conclusions of the G20 communique in St. Petersburg, mentioning this date, which we proposed. So we are clearly ahead of this fight, clearly. And as soon as the shutdown is over, I come back, or Jacques Lew comes back. I will meet him tomorrow, because it's possible with a shutdown, but I don't know for what technical reasons we couldn't sign. Sorry. But the problem is not on the French Treasury. Second, about OECD, I am, alongside with Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, and George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, one of the first ministers who supported the BEPS initiative of the IMF in order to fight against tax erosion. Yesterday, in Bercy, in my ministry, there was colloque about taxation of the internet with the OCDE, and we dedicated that to especially the follow-up of BEPS initiative in that field. And we also created there a snowball, because we are not only 3, we were 5, we were 6, and finally the G20 itself, and again, we were at the start of this movement, decided that the BEPS initiative would become an action plan for all the countries of the G20. So both questions here are on points of financial regulation for which my country is fighting, and fighting hard. About the 48 hours and 3 weeks, I can see a government who would propose that. And again, it seems that we work as much as the Germans if you look on a yearly basis. So this is not the problem. And this is not the problem even more because we have a higher productivity than other countries in Europe. So let's not have stereotypes about that. The question is not that French took too much vacation or eat too much baguettes. I remember the cover of The Economist saying that we were a time bomb at the heart of Europe that was going to explode. But when I look at my spreads, the spreads of my country, each day on the interest rate dedicated to the debt that we have to finance, we are perfectly credible. Let's be cool about that. Let's not work with caricatures. Well, I cannot be cool. We need to fight in order to create the conditions of credibility, but no caricatures again. And as far as the recommendations are concerned, we stick to the recommendation. The question is, what is the respective power of the center and the periphery, or the European institutions and the national states? Personally, I'm perfectly respectful of, as well, the recommendations and the Commission itself. On the 25th of September, I presented the draft budget for 2014 in the Council of Ministers Cabinet Office, the administration in Paris. And the day after, I was in Brussels to meet my friend, the Commissioner Olli Rehn, to tell him what it was about. And lucky, he said that our growth forecasts were careful and plausible, that our budget reflected ambitious reforms. This is what it is about. But it is logical that the Commission delivers recommendation. It's also logical that there is a national sovereignty in the democratic choices to apply them. I will take an example. The Commission recommended us to reform the pension system, and we did that. But the Commission showed one point, but it had to be financed. Okay. The Commission said you should do that by bringing up the retirement age at 65. That's not our choice. We're doing it another way, with longer payments for retirement. So there can be a dialogue. We are not a federal state, and we won't be a federal state. Again, we will be a federation of national states. And it would not even be logical that Europe, not being a federal state, would have more constraints than in a federal state. That our national states lose so much power that they are less than what the Delaware or Massachusetts are towards Washington. It's not logical. So when I speak very friendly with the Commission, I tell them, okay, you recommend, we follow, but we follow with our own democratic choices, with our own political and social structures. And this I'm very comfortable with. France is not anti-Commission. France is not anti-Europe. But France has its own government, has its own parliament, has its own social structure, has its own social model. And we are not renouncing for that. We are adapting our social model, our productive model, our public finances. This we must do. But we are not renouncing to what is the specificity of this country with thousands, or at least centuries of history, and also some structures which globally, I must tell you, we are proud about.
I think this is a great point on which to finish. Please join me in thanking Mr. Moscovici.